Hi, this is Walter Weesey with Yellowstone Country Fly Fishing, and this is my weekly fly tying video in the Montana Guide Flies series. And I'm going to wind up doing some other ones too, because I'm going to get sick of just doing guide flies. But this is kind of number 2 in my Montana Guide Flies series, and I call this a Thread Frenchie Stone, and it's kind of a change up from your usual Pat's rubber leg type stonefly patterns. And this is a pretty big one. This is a size 8, and on these 2x long barbed jig hooks, which I think every manufacturer makes. I'm sorry, this is a size 12, but on these jig hooks, they're grossly oversized relative to what it says on the package, and so this is really more like a size 8. Size 12 on the package, size 8 otherwise. But this pattern scales really well. You could easily tie this down to a 16, maybe even an 18 on a standard hook. You just need to use finer legs and then finer body thread and wire, which you'll see here in a second. And what I use this fly for is primarily two purposes. Number one is floating rough water in the fall, Yankee Jim Canyon in particular, but it would work elsewhere as well. And you can see here, there's really nothing to hang up in the current on this fly. It's going to sink really, really quickly. And in the Yankee Jim Canyon in particular, you've got really sharp drop-offs, small pockets. You need something that's going to penetrate, get down to fishing depth quickly. I don't like nymphing in there, but when, if the fish aren't rising, you kind of have to. And in that situation, I tend to fish this with either the copper bead, which is what I've got on this one, or a black bead, and then I'll leave off this little hot spot here. And then the other purpose I use this for, which is this time of year, I'm recording this on, I think it's October 20th, is for fall run brown trout. And in that situation, I'll usually use the copper bead with the orange hotspot there, and I'll sometimes even use a pink bead with the orange to suggest an egg. And same situation, I'm fishing this in the smaller pocket, water, mostly on the Gardner River. It would also work on the Gibbon, the lower fire hole. Not so much on the Madison, because I think it's a little less, it doesn't move as well. It doesn't have quite as much going on. The main feature is it gets to where the fish are quickly. And so in those smaller pieces of holding water where you need that, I think it can be more effective than something else like a TJ hooker, which is what I would also use. But this is a good bug. And like I said, you can size this down. I mean, you could tie this thing in yellow and black, and it'd be a perfectly good yellow Sally pattern in a size 16, for example. But the big ones here have a few tweaks. I mean, it'd actually be easier to tie in a smaller size. And I'll kind of go over that as I, come to it in the tying process. All right, so I've got a size 12. This is a Komodo hook, but like I said, every manufacturer is going to make this. It's a 2x long jig hook in a size 12, but it's really more like a size 8. And then I've got a 5/32 inch slotted tungsten bead on there. And obviously change the bead size based on the hook size. I'm not going to tie this much larger. You could tie it much smaller. And then normally for fishing in Yellowstone Park, obviously I need to use lead-free wire, but I discovered I'm out of 0.025 lead-free wire. And so I've got some 0.025 lead here. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap that onto the hook. And, you're going to find instructions to do however many turns of lead wire. I find it's a lot more effective to just, know where I want it to cover on the hook shank, how much of the hook shank I want it to cover. And I'd say about there is right. I want that a little bit, essentially the first half of the hook shank, maybe a little more. And I'm going to absolutely horrify people here by grabbing my nice tungsten carbide scissors, and I'm going to cut that little tag end there. And the trick here is, you notice I've got little dots of lacquer, it's actually nail polish, on that pair of scissors. And that tells me it's my old scissors, and it's okay to go ahead and do this. Normally I wouldn't want to do that to a nice pair of scissors. I'm going to come in. One thing about this fly is it's a good one, at least in this hook size, if with the hotspot, if you're looking for an excuse to buy a bunch more bobbins, because I've actually got 3 different threads I'm going to use on this fly. The first one here is 6.0 camel, and 6.0 light brown from any manufacturer is fine. And I'm just going to make a thread dam behind that wire, and then coat that wire to keep that in place. And then I've got another pair of nice tungsten carbide scissors here, which don't have those dots on it, and so that's what I'm going to use for most of my tying. Now, tails on this fly, I'll kind of go back and forth between copper brown and this is amber. This is barred sexy floss. You could use any of these, spandex legs with the barring. And the spandex do work better on this because they move a little more than traditional rubber legs do. Anyway, I'm going to bring that back to the bend and then tie that in just, V-style right there at the back of the hook. And then my rib on this fly is going to be medium copper ultra wire. And again, it doesn't matter the brand of the wire, but I'll also sometimes go copper brown on the same colorway here. And of course, if you're tying a different color of this pattern, you can change your wire color as needed. And then in the really, really small ones, you might even use midge flash for the rib on this fly. But I'm going to wrap that up. Essentially, the rear, roughly. You can see there, roughly the rear 3/4 of the hook shank, 2/3, 3/4. And I tied that in on the side of the hook to start creating a bit of a flattened profile. You can get crazy and use your pliers to mash the body flat if you want. I really just go with the tying stuff in on the side like that to kind of create a side profile. But anyway, I got that wire tied in. I brought my thread back up to the front there. And if you're tying a little one, you would not need to do this. And in fact, you really don't need to do this even on this one. But to make tying the fly's body faster, I'm going to use actually a different thread for the body. So I whip finished and cut that thread. And I'm going to come in here with Uni Stretch in Camel, which this is a kind of a light brown thread, basically the same color. Same brand, so obviously it is the same color. But you notice how that's got a lot of stretch to it. I don't know what this is made out of, but that makes it really easy to wrap a pretty flat body quickly and easily because you can kind of tighten and loosen or just, let it hang to take whatever twist out of it. Anyway, I'm going to come in here and do the same thing. Start that on the near side of the hook. The tag end is on the near side of the hook. And I'll trim that tag. Where I trim the tag also kind of helps start creating the body taper. If you notice, you can see already that there's some taper to that. And I'm obviously going to emphasize that taper a little bit with the number of layers I make. And the only reason I'm using this material is because it makes, creating that taper a lot faster. I could just use tying thread, or I could use floss. Floss would work just fine as well, a little less durable. I've tied these using spandex for the body like I did in last week's pattern, that purple hazy cripple. The problem with that is that stuff's, when you wrap it under tension, it doesn't create this much bulk this quickly. But I'm kind of wrapping that, trying to keep things basically symmetrical here. I don't want any big lumps, although I am going to coat that with UV resin, and that takes a lot of the lumps out of the fly. And then one thing I didn't mention because I was talking otherwise, I always take a couple turns behind my ribbing material, and that will keep that material from sliding off the hook shank. So I've kind of created, and you want to make this body a little thinner than you might otherwise expect because I am going to coat it with resin. I've kind of covered over the rear 2/3, 3/4 of that hook shank with a kind of a cone of that material, and I'm just going to let that hang and then rib that. And the number of turns of ribbing is up to you. Some of these I'll do just 4 turns, some 5, 6. Kind of depends on how much flash you want on the fly. And that's probably, I don't even know how many turns that is, but that's about how I usually like it to look. And then I'll make several turns over that with that material, the Uni Stretch, and then break my wire here. And again, if that didn't want a helicopter for me, I would just use those secondary scissors of mine. Anyway, I'm done with the Uni Stretch now, and so I'm going to just do like a 2-turn whip finish here with that. And you don't have to be, you don't have to tighten it down too hard. You don't have to trim your tag very well. I'm going to cover that over again with my camel thread. And the only reason I didn't use that Uni Stretch for the entire thing, actually, screwed up there. The only reason I didn't use that Uni Stretch for the entire thing, tying in the wire, tying in the tails, is that would create too much bulk. And that's why I switched that out in the middle. I started tying in my camel uni thread again, but that was a mistake. What I actually want to do is go ahead and cover this over with, after I've cut that Uni Stretch, I'm going to cover not the entire body, but up to the end of the wire here with UV Cure resin. And I like to use Loon UV Flow for this. You don't want to use something that's too tacky. And, but every manufacturer makes the same thing. And so, whichever company you like, Solar Res, whatever. And so I've covered that body, and I'm going to turn that to coat it completely. And one thing with this material, why I can get away with using that kind of light brown camel uni stretch is you notice how this darkened up immediately as soon as I put the resin on it. And I'm going to hit that with my death ray here. And then look away. I always like to look away from that thing because I usually have a backdrop, and even just off of the bead and so forth, you'll get some reflection, and a lot of that UV is absorbed because obviously that's what makes that resin cure. But you do get some reflection, and that's just like staring into the sun. So I'm just kind of turning that continuously here. And I do probably give that a lot longer than I would, if I was just putting a little bit on a wing case or something, because that body material is permeable. And so a lot of that resin is actually going to get into the body and not want to cure. You could also use super glue for this, or if you're really old school, actual epoxy resin. But anyway, that's cured enough now. And now I'm going to go ahead and start that camel thread up here towards the front. And now I've got 2 more of those same legs. And I always trim these to more or less to length to start with. And if, they wind up still being not quite even, and I'll even them up at the end. But I'm going to wind up tying in one leg on the opposite side of the hook shank here. And what I usually like to do is get them in and then even them out. And so I've just made a couple turns there. Got my other one here, make a couple turns. And then, I'm going to trim these to length because they are a bit long. But, if they're egregiously different lengths, I like to even them out a little bit there. And I'm going to wrap back, basically to the beginning of that body. And you see how when I bind them against that resin-coated body, it'll flare those out a little bit. And that's how I get some flare for the back of the body there. And then for the front, I'm not going to wrap all the way up to that bead. I leave a little bit of a gap there. In fact, I want to leave a little bit more of a gap there because I'm going to wind up taking a couple turns of dubbing in front of those legs to make those stand out from the hook shank. Anyhow, I'm going to come back now, and then my thorax on this fly is going to be chocolate brown UV, or just chocolate brown ice dub, not UV ice dub. And any brown kind of dubbing that's got a little flash to it would be fine. If you're really, really looking for an aggressive sink rate, you could even use quick descent dubbing, which is actually, it's like a Brillo pad. It's actually aluminum. And I'm only, you could tie the whole thing just all the way up the hook shank with the UV resin, but I like to have a little bit of variation here at the front, and then as this starts to get chewed up, it'll have a little bit of fine motion and so forth here at the front of the fly. But anyhow, I'm going to make... I'm going to cover over that kind of more or less with an even thorax. I don't really want any taper in that. And then I'll pull back those legs and take a couple turns in front. And I think I need a little bit more dubbing here. And when I first started tying this fly, I'd put on a wing case and coat the wing case with UV resin and things, and it just didn't make any difference. It's a lot easier to tie it this way without having a second application of resin and so forth. That's why I called it. In fact, I didn't really have a name for it until I simplified it, and that basically turned it into a Thread Frenchie here. But anyhow, I've dubbed up, right to the bead there, and then whip finish, cut the camel thread. And if I was tying this, for summer or early fall fishing, I'd be done now. I just apply my super glue. But I'm tying this for use kind of during the spring and fall, obviously fall right now, runs. And then same thing in the spring, actually. And so I want a little bit of orange on there to help suggest an egg and kind of push that button with the fish. So I've started some 6.0 fluorescent fire orange thread, and then I'm just going to whip finish that to create a hot spot. And then my adhesive, as on most flies, is going to just be super glue. I find it's a lot more effective than head cement. All right, so there you have it. And I'm actually going to wait to trim those legs. And sometimes I don't bother trimming them because, you can leave them a little longer and they move a little more. But I may have potentially gotten a little super glue on one of those legs. And so if I go playing with it until it's dry, it's going to damage that leg. But there you have it. That's a a Thread Frenchie Stonefly. And it's kind of a secondary fly for me, I have to admit, but when it works really well. It's just that it's got kind of a few use cases that really this is suitable for, and a lot of other things just are not. But as always, thanks for watching, and if you find this to be a useful fly and a useful video, you'll see a link down in the description below for my Buy Me a Coffee, which is essentially a tip. And last week's fly, I've made about $20 on it, so I thank the people who've thrown a buck into the kitty, and makes it a lot easier to keep doing these videos when I'm actually making a few bucks off of them, because book a guide trip obviously if you want, but most people obviously aren't going to be doing that because they can't afford it or they're not coming here. But as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.